This is a Sports Catastrophe production.
Hey there, hi there, ho there, it's Jeff Cutastrophe. Welcome you to another Sports Catastrophe on this day. And on this day, January 2nd, 1982, one of the greatest NFL postseason games of all time happened. It was called the Epic in Miami, in this game between the San Diego Chargers and the Miami Dolphins. A divisional round game, the winner got to go to the AFC title game. It's a Saturday late afternoon, early evening at the Miami Orange Bowl, the day after Clemson won the Orange Bowl to clinch their national championship. And people forget that Clemson had a national title before their dominance in the 2010s. But anyway, the Chargers and the Dolphins would meet. The Dolphins were the 2 seed, winning the AFC East with a mark of 11-4-1, whereas the Chargers won the AFC West with a mark of 10-6. It was a huge one. The Dolphins were the AFC's champions. But the funny thing about those Dolphins was that they had 2 quarterbacks, and it was almost like a rotation, as David Woodley and Don Strock would combine to be very good. And Strock was actually the reserve quarterback and played in 15 regular season games. So logically, they had a 2-headed beast at quarterback. Well, you know the names Woodley and Strock. You'd think, nah, they're not that good. But they were. Anyway, they had some good receivers. Jimmy Savallo and Daryl Harris, with Tony Nathan being a good running back, with Andra Franklin being a fullback. They had a very good offensive line as well. And a great defense that had A.J. Dewey, Fulton Walker, and the Blackwood brothers, Lyle and Glenn, there. The Chargers were 3-time AFC West champions when they did that. They beat Denver on a divisional record tiebreaker. Dan Feltz, part of Eric Coryell with the passing attack. They were the NFL leaders in scoring with 478 points and passing yards with 4,700 plus. Dan Feltz was just very good. He had Charlie Joyner, Wes Chandler, and Kellen Winslow. Kellen Winslow Sr. Wes Chandler actually was the 3rd option for wide receiver after John Jefferson was traded to Green Bay early in the season. San Diego had a good running attack. Chuck Muncie and James Brooks, not the creator of The Simpsons, did their jobs and all that. Their defense was one of the worst around, and that was huge. So the game started at 5 o'clock Eastern Time, and it was 76 Fahrenheit or 24 Celsius, clear, and the humidity was high, very high, 80% high. NBC would broadcast the game with Don Criqui and John Brody, the number 2 NBC broadcasters, as the number 1 crew of Merlin Olsen and Dick Enberg would be in Cincinnati for the Bengals game. Anyway, the first quarter started off. And the first drive, San Diego drove down and got a 32-yard field goal by Ralph Bernershka. The Chargers defense would force Miami to punt, and they punted the ball, but Wes Chandler would get a 56-yard punt return for a touchdown, making it 10-0. And then on the ensuing kickoff, there was a high short kick that was bouncing back in their direction, and under the rules at the time, they could recover it, which they did. And then they got a touchdown run to make it 17-0. And then after Glenn Edwards' interception of David Woodley, Dan Feltz threw a short pass to James Brooks for a touchdown. San Diego was up 24-0, and you can be forgiven for thinking this game was over. Miami had a bad drive, and then Don Strock, the reliever, came in to try to spark the Dolphins' offense, and he did. He led them down the field, and Uwe von Schalman kicked the field goal to make it 24-3. But the good times were still there for the Dolphins. The defense forced a fumble by Feltz, and they got the ball back. Later on, Strock threw a short pass to Joe Rose to make it 24-10. So anyway, Miami moved the ball to San Diego's 40-yard line with 6 seconds left. And people were thinking, well, what are they going to do? Because it's too long for a von Schalman field goal. So they went clever. They decided to do the hook and lateral. So Stroud took the snap and threw to Darrell Harris at the 25-yard line. Harris caught the ball, and then he found the lateral play. A lateral is a backwards pass, which is legal, and flipped it to Tony Nathan, who scampered for the remaining 20-plus yards. Touchdown. It was 24-17. It was a shocking move that the Dolphins would do the hook and lateral. That play was just humongous and all that. And the Chargers still had the lead out of the half, but the Dolphins had cut the deficit down to 7. Miami had the momentum. Early in the third quarter, Stroud had a drive and threw a touchdown pass to Joe Rose to tie the game at 24. However, San Diego countered as Felts led the Chargers on a drive, getting a touchdown pass to Kellen Winslow Sr. However, Miami had Don Stroud throwing great passes, including one to Bruce Hardy, who scampered 50 yards for the tying touchdown, 31-31. And then after a mistake by Charlie Joyner slipping, Felds threw an interception to Lyle Blackwood, who decided to lateral it to Gerald Small, who got it to the Chargers 15. The fourth quarter would start with Tony Nathan getting a 12-yard touchdown run, making it 38-31. The Dolphins looked like they were going to win this game, but with 4.5 minutes left, they fumbled the ball. Felds led the team to the Miami 9, and then Felts threw a blind pass for Kellen Winslow. Trouble was, Winslow missed the pass. That's the bad news. The good news is it found James Brooks, one of the running backs. Touchdown. We are tied at 38. And he was just in the right place at the right time, even though he was supposed to be a running back. But after a squib kick, Miami took over on their 40-yard line. And then after a reception by Tony Nathan and a 6-yard run by the fullback, the Dolphins were at the 26-yard line for the Chargers. A 43-yard kick to win the game. And Von Schallman had a kick. Unfortunately, though, Kellen Winslow at 6'5" was on the field to block the kick and extended it at the right time to deflect the kick with his fingers, making sure that the ball was no good and we would go to overtime. Now remember, this is 1982, so overtime was simple. First score won. Safety, field goal, or touchdown. So anyway, everyone was exhausted and dehydrated because of the humidity and all that. San Diego won the coin toss and marched down the field. All Bernurchka had to do was kick a 27-yard field goal. Simple, right? Well, unfortunately, a bad snap threw off his timing and he went wide left. Miami had a chance as Von Schallman had a 35-yard field goal to win the game and come back from 24 points down, which would have been a fantastic comeback for the ages. Unfortunately, the kick was too low and Leroy Jones, a defensive lineman for the Chargers, blocked it. So the Chargers would take over. Wes Chandler made a few catches. Charlie Joyner made a big catch. Felts led the team to the 10-yard line. Bernurchka for 29 yards. This time he was good. And overtime back in for 13 minutes and 52 seconds. So they almost went through one overtime period. But fortunately for the Chargers, they would win the game 41-38 in one of the most epic games of all time. It was just amazing. A lot of people thought that way. And Brian Gumbel, who was part of the NFL and NBC studio thing, said, if you didn't like this video game, you didn't like football. This would set a lot of records and all that. Miami and San Diego, at the time, it set the record for highest combined score of a playoff game with 79 points. Total yards, 1,036, and most passing yards by both teams, 809. Unbelievable. Stroud had a great performance coming off the bench. 29-43 for 403 yards, 4 touchdowns, which is a record for a quarterback coming off the bench of any playoff game ever. Darrell Harris got 106 yards receiving. Tony Nathan caught 9 passes for 114 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. Felts was 33 for 53 for 433 yards, 3 touchdowns. At the time, his attempts, completions, and passing yards were all records. Charlie Joyner got 7 passes for 108 yards. Muncie ran for 124 yards and a TD. And Wes Chandler did pretty well, getting 106 yards receiving. And of course, James Brooks had a couple of touchdown catches. Kellen Linswell had one of the best performances of his whole time. 13 catches for 166 yards and a touchdown. He had numerous injuries, and he blocked the field goal that would have won the game at the end of regulation. He had a pinched nerve in his shoulder, he had dehydration, severe cramps, and a gash in his lower lip. The exhausted Winslow being helped off the field by 2 of his teammates after the game is an enduring image, and some people think that Kellen Winslow was just putting on a show. So let's talk about the aftermath. Well, the Chargers, it wasn't over for them. They had to go to the AFC title game. And the next day, the Bengals beat the Bills, meaning that the AFC championship game was in Cincinnati. The only problem for the Chargers was that they had to go from a very hot Miami to 1 week later playing in a very icy cold Cincinnati, Ohio. The air temperature was minus 23 Celsius. And that was the air temperature, or minus 9 Fahrenheit. But that was just amazing. It was known as the Freezer Bowl, and I believe I covered that years ago. But anyway, the Bengals used the weather to their advantage and won 27-7. The Chargers won in Miami's weather, but they couldn't win in Cincinnati's weather. However, the Chargers tried again the next year and lost in Miami to the Dolphins, who avenged their loss from the previous year. It was actually the last time that Dan Fouts and crew would make the postseason, as the Chargers would have to wait 10 years to get to the postseason again. But Fouts, Winslow, and Joyner all happened to the Hall of Fame. The good news, in a sense, for James Brooks was that he actually went to the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 23 in '89 with the Bengals. So anyway, yeah. And the funny thing was the Chargers, after the epic in Miami, didn't beat Miami in Miami till 2019, and they were the LA Chargers. Anyway, Miami would bounce back the next season after the epic in Miami loss. David Woodley would be the main quarterback for Miami, getting them to the Super Bowl 17. But unfortunately, Washington used their running attack. The Hogs just did all that, and the Redskins won 27-17. Woodley had a terrible Super Bowl, despite the fact that he threw a 76-yard touchdown pass to Jimmy Cevallo. But then Dan Marino took over for Woodley as quarterback and helped Miami make the Super Bowl 19 in '85, but they lost to the Niners and Joe Montana. Don Struck was basically a career backup the rest of his way. He couldn't be the starter and all of that. So anyway, yeah, Don Shula's in the Hall of Fame, but yeah, the epic in Miami was, well, epic. And you can't beat that. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond.